Welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Today on the program, a look into crisis on the continent as fighting continues between the M23 rebels and the DRC army. Thousands of refugees from North and South Kivu provinces are finding refuge in Chibokte, southwestern Burundi. What's been going on so far? Then, Europe rallies around the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky following the tense exchange at the White House on Friday. Is there still hope for Ukraine? My guest, former Permanent Secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Joe Keshi, thinks now is a time for Europe to step up for Ukraine. That's Diplomatic Channel in a wrap. We'll be right back. Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has announced that the Gaza reconstruction plan has been finalized and will be presented at the upcoming Arab Summit on Tuesday. Speaking at a press conference with the EU Mediterranean Affairs Commissioner, Dubraka Sushe, Mr. Shoukry said, "The plan is completed and we're waiting to present it to our Arab brothers at the ministerial meeting and the summit for approval before sharing it with any foreign party." And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed on a temporary ceasefire proposal in Gaza as suggested by US President Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff during the Ramadan and Passover periods. The agreement includes extending the ceasefire in exchange for the release of half the remaining captives in Gaza. Welcome back. Fighting continues in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. On Thursday, 11 people were killed, 65 others wounded after an explosion rocked the city of Bukavu. This was during a rally for the M23 rebel group. The DRC presidency has blamed Rwanda for backing the rebels.
The refugees in Cibitoke have been settling under tent shelters cared for by volunteers from UNICEF, WHO and Doctors Without Borders. Many say they left their country because of the war. They had crossed the Ruzizi River to get to the camp. The UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, reported approximately 35,000 Congolese nationals have flocked to Burundi since the beginning of February as the M23 group claimed its control over Goma and Bukavu. This comes as M23 fighters entered Bukavu on February the 21st after advancing south from Goma, a key city in North Kivu province seized by the militants earlier this year. The group declared a unilateral ceasefire, which the DRC dismissed as false communication. The DRC has accused Rwanda of backing the M23, which Kigali denies. The conflict, fueled by the region's rich mineral resources, has displaced over 7.2 million people, making it one of the largest displacement crises globally. Meanwhile, head of UN Peace Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, arrived in Beni, North Kivu province on Friday to discuss peace efforts. He met new provincial governor, Major General Evariste Kakule Sumo, and addressed the need for a ceasefire, emphasizing the diplomatic efforts under the Luanda and Nairobi processes, the withdrawal of foreign forces, and MONUSCO's potential role in supervising the truce.
Europe is said to be facing a once-in-a-generation moment for security as leaders meet to discuss support and security for Ukraine. And a lot is riding on this as the Ukrainian president is attending right after his meeting with US President Donald Trump at the White House on Friday. The meeting was rather tense and Zelensky left without a deal on those rare earth minerals, neither a peace deal for Ukraine. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has ended the Security Summit for European leaders in London with a call to countries on the continent to do the heavy lifting with backing from the United States in ending the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attended the summit alongside other leaders at Sandringham Estate. In his press conference after the summit, the UK Prime Minister said the continent was at a crossroads in history. He unveiled that the UK, France and others have agreed to work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting, a plan that will be discussed with the US, and together they will take the plan forward.
Through my discussions over recent days, we've agreed that the UK, France and others will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting. Then we'll discuss that plan with the United States and take it forward together. Our starting point must be to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position now, so that they can negotiate from a position of strength. And we are doubling down in our support.
Starmer said he did not accept that the US is an unreliable ally, as there are no two countries as closely aligned as the UK and the US. Earlier, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said discussions had been good and frank, and they had discussed the need for comprehensive security guarantees, including putting Ukraine in a position of strength and ensuring it has the means to fortify and protect itself. As for relations with the US, she said, "We're ready together with you to defend democracy, to defend the principle that there's rule of law, that you cannot invade your neighbor, or you cannot change borders with force."
Of course, security guarantees are of utmost importance for Ukraine, but we need comprehensive security guarantees. This includes that we have to put Ukraine in a position of strength, that it has the means to fortify and protect itself, from the economic survival to the military resilience. It's basically turning Ukraine into a steel porcupine that is indigestible for potential invaders.
The meeting in London comes after US President Donald Trump and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's altercation at the White House. Trump told Zelensky he was losing the war with Russia, among other things.
God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless.
You don't
God
know
bless.
that.
You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because
I'm
you're in no
answering on this
position to
question.
dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this.
what
I'm not
You're
dictating.
in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
For those watching in Kyiv, the future of their country hangs in a balance.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed
From the
yourself
very-
to be in a
from
very
the
bad
very
position,
beginning
and he
of the
happens
war.
to be right about
From
it.
the very beginning of the war.
You're not
Mr.
in a
Brown,
good position.
I
You don't
was
have
in
the cards right now. With us, you start
I'm
having
not
cards.
playing
But
cards.
right now, you
I'm
don't.
very
You're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
think about?
gambling with
What do you
World
think
War
about?
III. And
You-
what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
Let's get more reactions to this. Joining us now is former Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Nigeria, Ambassador Joe Keshi. He joins us from Abuja. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin and try to replay what happened on Friday. What do you think was a trigger for what happened, the sparring contest that happened at the Oval Office with President Donald Trump, President Zelensky, and Vice President J.D. Vance?
I think we need to remind ourselves first that Trump has a limited world view, an understanding of where the world is today, vis-a-vis its American first. Today's America, or the world today, is not the world of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when America was, in almost everything, the dominant player in the world. When you go back and look at all the indices of development at that time, every indices you look at, America was number one. But today, The reality is that America is no longer number one in almost everything. Even in education, I'm not sure America is part of, it's anywhere near the first 13 nations when it comes to education. And so when you hear people like Trump thinking that they can recreate that through American force and then they can bully their way to do that, no, it's almost impossible. And the irony of it all is that where the world is today, America actually helped to create and to reshape the world. And so you cannot come all over suddenly and say that you are going to bully your way through in almost everything because you feel America, you have grievances because America has been cheated and so on. No, America helped the world to become what the world is today, you know. And so when you now come back as president and you think that the only way to do things is to bully your way across the continent, I mean, across the world, and look at what's happening even in his tax. Nobody is scared. He just said, look, if you tax me, I retaliate and things like that. So that's number one. Number two, of course, is that today's Trump updates, there's no adult in the room, neither the vice president nor Rubio, who for years was a strong supporter of Ukraine. So there's nobody that can actually help the president to understand that America has a responsibility to help Ukraine. America has a responsibility to defend the democratic world because America helped the world to fall in love with democracy the way we understand it today. So you cannot abandon somebody or you cannot abandon a nation who has for how many years depended on you, and suddenly you say to that nation, you are losing the war, you don't have any card, you want to start a third world war, and all that sorts of things. What do you expect would happen? And of course, the role of the vice president. And the vice president intervention, and when he intervened, I think makes a number of us to believe that this was a state-managed event. For example, in that White House room, the normal thing is that after the pleasantries, after the greetings, pressmen are requested to go out so that the real meeting can start. But in this case, the president and co said no, the pressmen should stay. And if you watch CNN reporting during the news, CNN was actually telling us what reporters were sending from that very meeting. And I was saying that I was asking myself, are reporters staying listening to this conversation? But they were still in a room where they normally exchange pleasantries. So they've not actually started the correct meeting itself when the disaster occurred. So at the end of the day, I think that that Trump's worldview, Trump's American first, and the way he's approaching it is probably what triggered the whole disaster that we witnessed, a few days ago.
Now, diplomatically, I'm just wondering, for the sake of people who are watching, what should have taken place in the Oval Office at that time? Because I can pick a few faux pas. First of all, you already mentioned what the Vice President J.D. Vance said was a trigger to what transpired between the Ukrainian president and President Trump, and it seemed like Trump came in with an agenda, sort of, and then the Ukrainian president found himself trying to defend his position with Trump and trying to defend his country. And this was not really what was supposed to be taking place at the time. It wasn't supposed to be a question and answer or interrogation of some sort. This was them supposed to be trying to find a solution to the war in Ukraine.
Look, the normal setting for such a meeting is that the president welcomes his guest and says some nice things about the country and the rest. And then the guest now has the right of reply, where he thanks the president or thanks the United States for all the support, and then reiterates why they are in Washington and what they hope that at the end of the conversation, this will be achieved. Bear in mind that what Trump and co were looking for was that there would have been an agreement signed on the exploitation of some minerals in Kuwait, in Ukraine. They've not even gone to that extent, and so the fact that they came up with all these, irrelevancies. You have not shown gratitude to the president. You have not thanked the president. You have not done this to the president and the American people. That shows you that they deliberately wanted. Look, I think for me, I'm not sure that Trump is ready to commit himself to a peace that the Russians do not want. As we speak today, there's no peace plan on the table. Beyond the agreement for the Ukrainian minerals, there is nothing you can call a peace plan. And this is exactly what the president of Ukraine is asking for.
Yeah, it seemed more like a business arrangement, more than a pact for peace. So it does seem like the Americans at this point, I think we can say that the Americans were playing to President Vladimir Putin's song, his music at this point, because later on I read that back in Russia, even though the Russian president has said nothing about it, but the government itself was very pleased with the way things had turned out. And there was something that Trump said, that the Ukrainian president was not ready for peace, is what he said. He told him was not ready for peace. He told him was losing the war. How do you think, statements like that? I mean, just before that, he had, lambasted him last week and the past 2 weeks, following those meetings that the U.S. officials had with Russia, where he almost seemed like he was praising Russia and, giving them a lot of leverage, sort of, tactically backing Russia in this war and, throwing Ukraine down in the dumps and further demoralizing the people, demoralizing the president. What kind of message do you think this sends back to the Ukrainian people who have looked to the U.S. Since the start of this war for help and who have so graciously been able to help, sending military aid under the Biden administration and with promises of more aid? It does seem like everything is about to come to an end.
Look, the message is very simple. One of fear, one of confusion, to a people that has for the last 3 years depended a lot on the United States of America. To watch that scene, to hear the president of the United States, why it is so frightening or why I believe it is so frightening to the Ukrainians listening, watching at home. When Trump say you are losing this war. Look, Trump, the United States has always helped Ukraine with intelligence. And so if you are a Ukrainian, today you'll be wondering, is there something the United States know that we do not know? Are we actually about to be consumed by the Russians? And is that why the president of the United States is saying you are losing this war? Now, that in itself creates fear. It creates confusion. Some people might actually decide that, look, if the Americans have information we do not have, and it is certain they are saying we are losing this war, automatically for most people in Ukraine today, the Americans probably know more than their own government. Some might actually consider beginning to leave their Ukraine to a safer place rather than being under Russian control if Russia decides to overrun or if Russia can overrun the country. This is why such statements we have done. Quite unfortunate that some of these things that we heard during that, meeting. As I said, if the Americans had prepared, if the Americans were ready to make some commitment, if the Americans genuinely believed that they wanted peace, I think they should have handled this better.
I heard people denigrate the Ukrainian president because of his background. He's an actor, he's a comedian, and they say that this is how he has no idea about governance. And I've heard, the criticism for the way he has led the country seemingly into this war with Russia. What do you make of the man himself and his style of governance and the way he's carried on in this war?
You know, I think we are being unfair to the gentleman. He was elected by his people. He was elected by the people of Ukraine. Ukrainians have a reason why they elected him, and he won by a very large percentage. Look, it would take a long time to go back to the history and how he got into the presidency. He was not prepared for that. He was not a politician, but Ukrainians elected him, you know, and therefore he has led his country, for me, admirably very well. Look, the Russians went into this war believing that under some months they would have overrun Kiev and then taken over the whole country itself. Here we are, three years later. You know, the Russians are actually not winning this war. They are occupying reasonable part of Ukraine, but that is not victory yet. That is not victory yet. So I think it's unfair, you know. I mean, it's like anybody saying that, by the way, when Reagan, an actor, ran for the seat in California, the same thing was said of him. And when he ran for the presidency, look, people made the same remarks anyway about an actor coming to, coming to the White House. But he turned out to be a great president at the end of it all. So this guy has been in power for how many years now? More than 6 years or thereabout. And part of that, he's been leading his country courageously during a wartime. He's made it clear that he's ready to leave after the war, which I think is admirable. After the war, they probably need somebody else to go through the peace period, the rehabilitation and the redevelopment of Ukraine. But to downgrade him, you know, to blame him that he lacks experience before because he was a comedian. For goodness sake, he was elected by the people of Ukraine. When you begin to say he was a comedian, he was this, he was that, you are actually insulting the people who elected him. And that's the Ukrainians.
So he'll be attending the Security Summit in London. Is there more pressure now on Europe to show up for Ukraine because of the US president's actions?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, I don't know whether you recall or whether you heard the incoming German chancellor. I think he was very clear that Europe has to take its destiny into its hands because they can no longer trust the Americans to defend them should anything happen in that part of the world. And so Europe is under pressure to take care of its own destiny. And they've been supportive. And as a matter of fact, Amarachi, they provided more support to Ukraine than the United States.
In line with that as well, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says that he and President Macron of France will be going to Washington this week to present to him a plan for Ukraine, a plan decided at the summit. How do you think that would help? Or do you think they can achieve, helping to smoothen frayed nerves as regards that tense situation at the White House on Friday?
If you go back and look at the meeting between Trump and Macron and between Trump and the British Prime Minister, I think you will credit the two gentlemen that, oh yes, they have learned over the years based on their experience of dealing with Trump, the first time around. I saw a video making the rounds of what Fareed Zakaria said that Zelensky should have done. Just go there, kiss the ring, and say, look, you are the greatest guy since God created the earth. Take this big national honor, and gentlemen can actually play a role. Number one, they understand Trump. Number two, they understand what Trump wants. Number three, they've learned how to flatter Trump and get Trump to... Look at the way the British Prime Minister dealt with Trump. Very clever. He was going to Washington and he went to the king and collected a letter inviting Donald Trump to to Britain for the second time. And you could listen to the way he described it. He said it's unprecedented and gave Trump to read. And Trump said, oh, this is very nice. Could you read it to the world to hear? That he's been invited for the second time on a state visit. Look, that whatever Trump was prepared to say to the British, Trump forgot it and went back to the usual language between the British and the Americans, special relationship. So I sincerely hope that they would do better this time, given the fact that they already know Trump, they already know how to deal with Trump, they can handle Trump, and if they can sell a peace agreement, But let me say this: one visit to Washington and one meeting with Trump will probably not do the deal. But if it will, we'll be grateful to God. But I think that a number of more meetings between the officials, Ukraine, the Russians, and the United States, it's what is required for a comprehensive peace settlement. This is not something you do one in isolation, then the next day you are talking of an economic agreement. The next day you are talking of relationship between the United States and Russia. No, let's focus on the real thing. How do you ensure that at the end of it all, Ukraine is still a country and that the killing and the destruction is brought to an end? Look, Amarachi, as we speak, and as all the last 40 days of Trump, he's been talking of peace and negotiating peace. The Russians have been bombing Ukraine. That's not a sign of somebody wanting peace. There are countries, I'm trying to remember right now, when everybody begins to talk of peace, you are told, look, hold your guns, slow down the attack. Let's see what we can do. But the Russians have continued unabated, to hit at Ukraine, demonstrating that the Russians themselves think that, look, Trump is God sent, so they can do whatever they like at this point. They just don't care because they think Trump is on their side.
Ambassador Joe Keshi, thank you again for speaking with us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
This is where we end the program today. Your thoughts and comments are always welcome. Send them to @Ubani_Amarachi on X and @Amarachi Ubani on Instagram. I'll see you next time.